You are listening to The Growth Signal. My name is Alyssa Nolte,
And my name is Anders Boulanger.
and we are going to get right into it. Anders, what is your hot take?
My hot take, I talk about being engaging and engagement skills. And I believe engagement skills are dwindling because of technology, AI, generational differences. And I think this is something we need to foster in people if we want people to understand what we want to communicate, what we want to sell, how we want to lead. We have to engage first, and that's what I'm passionate about.
I can't wait to have this conversation because I was just talking with, in my limited free time, I coach a high school dance team. And so I'm working with kids that are ages like 14 to 17 typically. And we were just having a conversation around how the way that we engage with these teenagers has really evolved over the last several years, right? The way I used to be able to talk to kids back in the pre-COVID days or the pre-really cell phone days is entirely different than the way I've been able to communicate and engage and get their attention and get them to engage back with me now. And yes, they're teenagers, so they're always a little bit awkward, but I see the same exact experience in my employees, in the clients that I work with, in the people that I talk to, and I think it's more than just a business phenomenon. I think it's maybe a worldwide phenomenon, and how do we engage in a way that's authentic and real and useful?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there, and there's a lot of headwinds that we're experiencing. And I mean, one of them is that we just, don't have to engage with people as much as we used to, right? There's automated teller machines, and you know, uh, uh, we can buy groceries without talking to anyone. There's those pieces where we're not just bumping into people like we used to, and we can just be head down and shut down on our phones, right? And so that combined with the fact that information is kind of cheap now, right? The AI will just tell us, right? We don't need to um, interact as much in that sense as well. So there's a number of things happening, and so I just feel like there's a little bit of a, and when I talk to sales leaders too, there's a bit of a sales apocalypse they talk about, where the younger salespeople are just sending emails or automated email sequences, and they don't even talk about a product. And so when they get in front of someone, and we do a lot of work at trade shows, in-person events, we see this like deer in the headlights phenomenon happening. And so I think there's this growing need for, what we call engagement skills, and whether that is presentation skills, whether it's talking about using our voice in a way so that we are spiking dopamine through an interaction to compete with all these dopamine spikes that we get off of our phones, right? So uh, there's a lot going on.
I wrote in my notes, all caps, the word skill, because I love that you call it that. Because I feel like maybe in the past, we've looked at salespeople and we've said, oh, they're just such an engaging person. Oh, they're so good at communication. Oh, they're just an extrovert. And we put all of those things we felt about them down to personality and the way that they were,
Mhm.
who they were at their core, and not necessarily recognizing the fact that these are most likely skills that they developed. Maybe they had a natural inclination for it. However, these are skills, these are things that you can learn, and I think you're right, because I can hop onto Instacart and order my groceries and never actually speak to a human being and get all of my Christmas presents from Amazon and never go to my class reunion because I see everybody's updates on Facebook. You start to lose some of that natural practice that you would get in developing those skills, in being engaging, in thinking about your cadence and your eye contact and really connecting and listening in a conversation.
Well, there's an important feedback loop that, you're touching on there, is that if we don't try these things out and get that pat on the back to say, "Hey, good job, that worked," we then don't know what to do, and then we're more and more apprehensive or anxious about trying out different things, right? Like I think about way back in the day when I was in school, and I was a little bit of that class clown kind of thing, right? And you're like picking your spots to kind of make a quip that you think is going to be funny, right? And if it and you get a laugh, that is that pat on the back, right? That you're like,
Yep.
oh, I chose the right moment, I said the right thing, that sort of thing. And so what we find, and I have a lot of entertainer friends. I have a background being a magician for many years. Since I was like 5 years old, I still do magic, using it as a metaphor to whatever I'm communicating, right? When I'm with an audience. And there's all kinds of advantages to that too, because it makes it more mysterious and makes people want to watch. But with that entertainment side of things, entertainers are constantly getting that feedback loop very tight because they have an audience that responds. And so what I talk about, and I wrote a book called Engage First. In the book, I talk about the fact that you need those kind of low stakes places where you can practice these skills, right? Where you can try things out and it's not going to go against you in a bad way, right? We want to just be able to establish some confidence and work on those skills. And what you were saying before, yes, there is some wiring that we all have, but this is something that just with practice, you get better over time. And you just have to kind of give yourself permission to start working on these things and looking for opportunities to implement.
And important too to note that it doesn't have to be like specifically practicing your product pitch or specifically practicing a sales conversation. You can practice the same underlying skills in really any setting in any format. Because there you can't replace when there's a real human being on the other side of the conversation, right? I can give my pitch a million times into my webcam or into my mirror,
Mhm.
or I can write it down and I can watch recordings of sales calls, but nothing really replaces the actual hands-on staring into the eyes of a human being and practicing the underlying skills that go along with this. So tell us, what is like if someone is hearing this and they're feeling that little like twinge in their gut of, okay, I have to make a change. I have to do something differently. I have to start either building these skills myself or finding ways to make it possible for my team to really start to build them. What is the one thing you would have them start doing if they're feeling that little twinge of oh no, I'm in trouble?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways we can approach that, but I think that for me, it's, finding a safe place where you can start trying new things and maybe stretching yourself. And one quick example I have, if we're talking about, in a workplace or business place, we talk about it in my book, and I call it the hierarchy of communication. So if you look at the very bottom, it's just written words, like an email, it could be a handwritten letter. All you have is words to be able to engage people with, right? If we do one tiny step above that, you get emojis happening, right? We can do a little bit of tone with emojis so that people don't take our joke the wrong way, whatever kind of thing. We go above that. Now we're using our voice. So, like a phone call, I'm always encouraging my kids, stop texting, get on the phone, right? Like that's this idea of let's try to use these and develop these skills and put ourselves in places to be able to do that. So just to continue that hierarchy, above voice would be virtual, right? Here we are recording this virtually. I can see you. I can get a sense of, what you're nodding your head. You're taking this information in. You hear me, right? And I have some body language, maybe chest up body language. You don't see the whole body. We're not breathing the same air. And of course, the very top is in person. And so I encourage people to be as effective as they can within reason or the constraints of, if you have to fly somewhere to be there. If it's super important, maybe that's good. Maybe you do that. But put yourself in positions where you are with people and you can start to use these skills. Now, we have trainings at our company that are on demand. We do live virtual trainings. We train in person, of course. And that would be something where if businesses wanted to kind of lean into this, and especially, on the sales side of things, that can make a big difference for people if they're connecting. But, in my book, Engage First, it doesn't matter if you, lead, persuade, sell, influence, whatever you want to do. We do have to engage people before we do that second part. So, uh, just start using it and experimenting. Other things, one more thing I want to add on is maybe try something different, like an improv class or, some sort of movement class, even like martial arts are good just for like getting in our bodies a little bit more too. So lots of different ways of kind of stretching ourselves is kind of what I'm getting at.
I love that you really give us that kind of hierarchy. I'm a psychology degree, so the hierarchy of needs, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, 1,000%. Like at the base, we have to use words, right? That's
Yeah.
our bare minimum. But there is a self-actualization, and let's all be honest. Like as much as I love working from home and being having that freedom to wear sweatpants underneath my desk or look professional from the waist up, it doesn't replace the way that we feel and engage and connect as human beings in person. And it's
Mm.
not always practical for us to go in person for everything, right? I'm a small business. We're very careful with where our money goes. And if I flew everywhere to do these podcasts, we would be absolutely broke. Um, but I think you have to be really clever too when you're thinking about how do we look at the medium that we're existing in and how do we adapt our strategy to reflect the medium and the goals that we're trying to achieve. So, I have an example of when my team was working together, I had a lot of young people on the team. And one of the things that I think is so detrimental to our young people who are coming into the workforce now is they don't get to learn by osmosis anymore. When I
Mm.
was coming up in the workforce, we were in an office. Someone would shout a question across the room and someone would shout the answer back. And even though I wasn't a part of that conversation or that project, I heard the question and I heard the answer and I absorbed it, even if I didn't do it consciously. And so I was trying to figure out how do I help my new people who are coming in who've never worked in an office, who don't even know to ask the question, let alone know what the answer is, and they're not being given the opportunity to join the conversation because they're not party to it. It's not part of their work. However, it is useful for them. And so we would do virtual bullpen work sessions where we would all get on Zoom and we would all be on cameras off, mics off, but we're all on the call. And if someone had a question, you would pop on and you'd say, "Hey, Alyssa, I have a question." And I'd say, "Yeah, what's up? How can I help you?" And then they would ask me the question and I would give them the answer. And then we'd go back to our little cubicle of being on mute, on camera off, because that way everyone could hear the conversations and hear the questions. So we kind of would do that every once in a while, especially when we're working on a big project. Was it perfect? No. Did it replace the bullpen osmosis experience? Absolutely not. But it was the best thing we could come up with to get that goal, get that priority, get that achievement in the medium that we were able to work in.
Yeah. I amen to all of that because one of the quotes that came up for me, which was one of my mentors, was no matter how much we click from place to place, it'll never replace face to face. And that idea that we're so siloed, in our virtual cubicles, like you're saying, we don't get to rub shoulders, we
Right.
don't get to observe how people are professional. Like we're talking engagement skills, but there is this level of professionalism that, people are seeing that can be lacking in places. And
Yeah.
I think it's that idea of, coming up with people and watching how people conduct themselves. We could get into executive presence being a thing. We can talk about like there's a lot of, kind of turning points where we can or avenues that we can go down. But I think you're right. Just being around what we need to emulate is important for us, for our development.
And just for the humanity of the person on the other side of the screen, right? Like you and I are looking at each other through webcams across thousands of miles with you being in Canada and me being in Iowa, and you're two-dimensional to me. And so if I only think of you as a two-dimensional person on the other side of the webcam, how is that going to change our relationship if we were working together? If you were my leader or I was your leader, right? If we only see each other as part of the business, I think that really changes. Because when I was in person, my coworkers, I knew the names of their dogs. I knew what
Mm.
they were doing on the weekend, right? There was that like water cooler small talk time, and it changed my perspective of them as their leader, trying to get them all to go in one direction. For example, I had a person on the team who was a former Division 1 athlete. If I wouldn't have taken the time to get to know her, I would have never known that she was a Division 1 athlete and she played team sand volleyball on the weekends. And the way you work with a Division 1 athlete is an entirely different process, and the way you lead those peoples is just different. And so it's harder though, I feel like in these mediums and in the world that we live in post COVID to develop those relationships in a way that feels authentic, that doesn't feel performative, that isn't some weird icebreaker that nobody wants to do. So, how do we actually engage first before we move on to the real work? To quote your book name.
Yes, that's right. Well, I think, that connection piece is kind of what we're, to put a label on what kind of we're talking about. And rapport being one of those. And we talk about that in the book. where we like people who are like us. And on the very surface of that, it can be body language. It can be tone of voice. It can be vernacular, or the words that we use. We're kind of feeding back that person's words. We start feeling connected to them, even if we're not, just through those types of, and we don't want to say aping, but mirroring and matching is something you
Right.
might have heard before, right?
And we do it naturally.
Yes.
It's actually an instinctual protectionist thing. Like back in the day when we all lived in caves,
Yeah.
a rival tribe would come up and, you'd have to wonder, are these people safe or are they dangerous? And you mirror them in
Right.
order to signal you are safe, so therefore don't attack me, right? I'm
Yeah.
safe. I'm not going to fight with you.
Yeah.
Don't attack me.
I'm just like you.
I'm just
Why
like you.
would you? Yeah.
Exactly. And so like some people will mirror for bad reasons, right? They will try to manipulate. But it is an instinctual approach to how we are as human
Yeah.
beings, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
And I would challenge the listeners right now, is the next time you're in a conversation, and this is the hardest part, this awareness thing about rapport and mirroring and matching, is to remember that it exists in the first place. But if you can remember this very conversation right now as you're listening, and the next time you're in a conversation, look, are your arms crossed and their arms crossed? Are your hands in your pockets? Maybe their hands are in the pockets. That's kind of some of the basics. Sometimes the legs are crossed. Something when you're sitting, you might see that. And all of a sudden you're going to go, holy crap, we're in rapport right now, right? We are mirroring each other, or we're
Yeah.
matching, meaning the opposite of mirroring. So it's not like looking in a mirror, but at least both, there's two legs that are crossed, right? And so in that, you're like, okay, this is happen naturally. Where rapport and that connection is important is when you're not connected, right? You feel that there is something not quite right. You can start to try to cultivate that. And like you said before, Alyssa, that it could be used for just like money, just like, a tool. Things can
Right.
be misused as well. And that's where sometimes things like that get this bad rap and manipulative. But if you're just trying to understand someone, like in a negotiation, seeing their point of view, like rapport is a very powerful way of seeking agreement and seeking that bond, really, that's unconscious between the two of you. So that's a great place to start, right? But we do want to seek other commonalities too, right? So
Yeah.
whether it is family, whether it is hobbies, different connections that you can then share. I know when I travel and I meet another Canadian, and if we're in the States, we always connect like, hey, how's it going? Like we're suddenly, we're fish out of water.
Yeah.
And so in that way, we can bond very quickly. So, beyond the rapport, what other commonalities? And you do have to maybe make some more, do a little bit of work, do a little bit of asking, but coming from a sincere point of view where you care, uh, that's what it's about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny that you said, like, when you meet another Canadian in the States. When we travel, my husband will almost always wear a, Iowa Hawkeyes T-shirt somewhere, and every single time someone will be like, "Hey, go Hawks!" and, like, across the
Yeah.
airport or across Disney World or wherever we're at, and it's so funny because we get a little kick out of that, and it's fun for us because it's someone like us in a same unfamiliar place, and whether we realize that or not, psychologically, we are seeking out that sameness and that comfort and that familiarity, right? We crave adventure, but we also crave
Yeah.
comfort. And so we see that. And I think as leaders, we can use this conversation that we're having right now to ask yourself, what are you signaling to your team, right? Like if your leader is sitting back like this, and you can't see me if you're listening to the podcast, but like sitting back with my arms crossed, or always has camera off, or is always rushing into the meeting, throwing some stuff on the ground, and then rushing out of the meeting. Like, what messages are you sending body language wise when
Mm.
you're working with your team? Because if they're going to mirror you, which we said is a natural human response, you're going to get that back tenfold from the 10 people who report to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that your example with the T-shirt is such a neat example, because the person who yelled "Go Hawks" put themselves out there. They took a risk. They're being bold in order to try to create connection.
Yeah.
And of course, your smile or your response is that positive feedback that they did the right thing. So there's two sides of that, right? One, you kind of wearing that, or your husband wearing that shirt, knowing that this has probably happened, right?
Yeah.
On purpose.
Yeah.
So you're open to be engaged with, and then someone else's willingness to put themselves out there and take a risk to engage. Both are kind of required. And so when we look at, I often talk about an engagement gap, that we're so overwhelmed that we don't want to be engaged with because of just the sheer volume of, let's say, marketing messages or whatever coming at us in a day, right? Notifications on our phone, et cetera. And then the fact that our engagement skills are lower now, and we may not want to take that risk. We kind of hold inside of ourselves. We just kind of like, we're going to just sit back. And so that creates a bit of a perfect storm, if you will, and what we call the engagement gap. So how do we close that? Well, being more willing to engage and being open, just kind of like that t-shirt analogy, like
Yeah.
let's create opportunities for that to happen.
Well, let's carry that analogy through because I just wrote down like if this is not about your favorite sports team, not about traveling, but how do we create this these opportunities for someone to wear a proverbial shirt and for someone to recognize that they're open to engagement and recognize what they're looking to engagement for. How do we create these situations at work where we see someone wearing a shirt that we recognize as one of us and we are confident and open enough to take the risk of engaging?
Well, I feel like sometimes that recipient side, they they should be open in certain circumstances or contexts, right? And they want to. So we were talking about a Zoom call with your cohorts or your coworkers. Well, you want them to be a part of something. They
Yeah.
probably want to be a part of something, and yet maybe they haven't been called to do so, right? So sometimes that engager actually shoulders a lot more of that responsibility, right? The engagees are kind of there, right? And they maybe that shirt is just them being on the call, right?
Yeah.
So, but that engager, they really do have to kind of take risks, right?
Yeah.
And do a little bit to something different. In terms of capturing attention, things that create contrast are what get noticed. And so that's why when I say take a risk and be bold, those things sometimes need to be fairly stark. They might need to be a little bit different. There might be a pattern interrupt that has to happen so that people actually snap out of it and then give you the time of day to do what it is you need to do. Okay. So, I mean, there's some examples, like I've been working trade shows for many years doing infotainment. So I do magic with an informational message, right?
Oh,
Like
cool.
whatever the company wants communicated in terms of the marketing message. And so I start off my presentations by throwing down $2,000 on the floor of the trade show aisle. And of course, this is a massive interrupt, right? Like, what's
Yeah.
going on with our money, right?
Yeah.
It's also a huge dopamine spike. Like, oh, can someone win that? What's
Yeah.
happening? And so that is my foot in the door
Right.
to
Get
then
that attention so they
stop them.
disrupt
Yeah.
their current process and
Yeah.
pay and, like, at least give you a tiny ounce of attention.
Right. And for those of you who are watching this and those who aren't, I have these like orange lights up behind me here. And
Mhm.
and so I've kind of framed myself. It kind of looks interesting. It's a bit different. And during the pandemic, there was a time where I worked for a company called VMware, and they're a big tech company, billions
Yeah.
of dollars. And they were wanting a virtual MC for one of their events. And so I showed up with these lights on, and the woman who eventually hired our company, she admitted afterwards that she was multitasking on 3 screens. She really didn't want to be in the meeting. There was multiple people that I was meeting with, a whole
Right.
team, and she saw the lights, and that was what caught her attention initially. And then there was a time where I actually leaned into the screen and I shared a little secret, and my voice got a little quieter, and she found herself leaning into the screen as well. And it was at that moment she goes, "Okay, this is our guy." Right? So that's what I had to capture her attention in order to sell her on my skills.
Right.
And so there's lots of these examples of having to disrupt, right? And be a little bit different to get that first part of the wedge, that foot in the door so
Yeah.
that you can take people where you are, right? So,
Yeah.
um, does
And I'm
that
gonna badly
yeah,
paraphrase this, but
yeah,
I bought your book this morning, and, one of the core concepts that I saw on the cover, and it's on the way, it'll be here Monday. One of the core concepts on the cover was essentially, like, it doesn't matter how incredible or talented you are, what your product is, if nobody knows you exist, if nobody's paying attention. And so, I caught that in the 12 seconds that I looked at to buy it on Amazon, where I searched your name and came up with the book. And it's totally true. Like, you can be the best in the world at whatever you're trying to do, and none of it matters if nobody knows you exist.
yeah. What I say, and I kind of came up with this after the book, I wrote it, but no one knows you're the sage until you first engage, right? So it's like,
Love it.
the wisdom that you have goes to waste, right?
On
So
that note, tell us more about the book. Where can we get it, and what can we expect to find if we pick up a copy?
yeah, for sure. So you can buy that book on Amazon. You can buy it anywhere books are sold pretty much. In it is really, each chapter breaks down these different kind of engagement skill sets, if you will. So I talk about authority, right? The idea if we don't know who you are, why should we pay attention to you, right? So how we shape our authority, whether that is how we stand, how we move, how we talk, maybe it is even in our title, in our introduction, all of those things can make people want to pay attention or not, right? So that's an example. We talk about rapport, we talk about using our voice. We talk about virtual skills. So there's a lot of applicable skills that you can work on that would help you in your work, in your life, and even in relationships in some cases. So
And considering all of the people that you know or aspire to know, who else should we be paying attention to?
you know what? I was thinking about this because you did give me a little warning on that, and I studied with a man named Bo Eason. And he is an ex-football player turned actor turned speaker trainer who is very amazing, amazing storyteller. And you should definitely check him out on YouTube or something like that and just dig into that a little bit. I think if you like what I'm talking about, you'll love Bo Eason.
And if someone is really connecting with you, they want to learn more, besides getting a copy of the book, where can they find you online?
For sure. LinkedIn was probably my strongest social platform, and it's Anders Boulanger. I'm going to spell it real quick. Anders is my first name, last name. Boulanger is Boulanger. It's French for baker. And then also our website, engageify.ai. Oh, one more, sorry. Engage-first.com is for the book.
Cool.
There's 4 ways to engage PDF you can download from there, as well as there's a free presentation training if you get the book. So some little bonuses there.
Well, I can't wait to get my free presentation training because I have the book on the way. Thank you, Anders, so much for coming on the show today. I loved this conversation. I think it's so important for everyone to hear, whether you work all in person, all online, a mix of both, or you just have to grow your business, which, hey, that's all of us. These skills are going to change the way people build their businesses, build their relationships. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on, Alyssa. Appreciate it.